The previous lesson provided an overview of the history of the fight against gender discrimination. In this class, we will highlight the progress made by the movement for the rights of sexual minorities. After mentioning some early precedents, we will talk about the main breakthroughs of this movement during the 20th century, concluding with a reference to the vanguard of this movement in the 21st century. Although some accounts sustain that since homosexuality can be found in the animal realm, its natural condition alone should be sufficient evidence of its long-standing history in the planet. The truth is that history can only be made and told by human beings. Homosexuality and bisexuality, as well as transgender and transsexual people, have been documented in many cultures since ancient times, such as Indian ancient religious texts and Greco-Roman accounts of daily life. However, as pointed out by Michel Foucault, the modern social, cultural, and scientific attitude towards such minorities has been shaped in relatively recent times. It was only during the 19th century and early 20th century that the phenomenon of homosexuality caught the attention of medicine. At the turn of the 19th century, Sigmund Freud deemed homosexuality and bisexuality as a natural condition of a part of humankind, and not as a disease or a crime. In 1919, Magnus Hirschfeld founded the Institute for Sexual Science in Berlin. Yet, such openness in the scientific community towards sexual orientation experienced some major setbacks in the first half of the 20th century. Following the rather ominous precedent of Oscar Wilde's trial and conviction in 1895 for breach of Britain's sodomy laws at the time, in the wake of the Nazis rising into power in Germany, the library of the Institute for Sexual Science in Berlin was completely burned down. The Nazis were keen to destroy literature they deemed dangerous. Later on, homosexuals would become part of the inmates of the infamous concentration camps run by the Nazis all over Eastern and Central Europe, suffering the Holocaust as much as any other of its victims. Some of those prisoners even had to remain in the camps after the Nazi defeat due to the criminalization of homosexual relations under the German criminal code at the time. Interestingly, the sexual minorities movement would adopt as a political symbol of endurance and defiance the very same inverted triangle the Nazis assigned to identify homosexual prisoners, much as Christians embraced the cross, a gruesome Roman device of torture, as their symbol. Across the sea, the situation was also dire for sexual minorities in the Americas, a region rife with sodomy laws prohibiting homosexual conduct well into the 20th century. Particularly harsh was Senator McCarthy's alternative witch hunt of homosexual employees in the federal government of the United States in the 1950s, informally known as the Lavender Scare. Oddly enough, his main assistant, lawyer Roy Cohn, was homosexual. The situation did not improve in the continent upon the classification of homosexuality as a sociopathic personality disturbance by the American Psychiatric Association, APA, in 1952. Unlike the history of the feminist cause seen in the previous lesson, there are no discernible waves or period in the history of the sexual minorities movement during the 20th century, but rather important landmarks that advance the cause farther, one step at a time. After the foundation of a short-lived Society for Human Rights in Chicago in 1924 to uphold gay rights, in 1950, Harry Hay and Chuck Rowland founded another gay rights organization called the Mattachine Society in Los Angeles. In 1855, Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin followed suit in San Francisco, founding the Daughter of Abilities, the first American lesbian rights organization. In 1867, the long-standing British laws criminalizing sodomy since the 16th century were repealed. During the 1960s, the sexual minorities movement was both spurred and overshadowed by the civil rights movement in the United States. The sexual minorities movement remembers one single episode at the end of that decade as a turning point in its history. On June 28, 1969, patrons of the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village, New York City, started a 3-day riot in protest of the police harassment they had been suffering for years. 1 year later, on June 28, 1970, thousands of LGBTI people marched in New York to commemorate the riot. From that year on, that date is celebrated throughout the world as the Gay Pride Day. The 1970s brought the removal by the American Psychiatric Association of homosexuality from its list of mental disorders in 1873. In 1877 took place the election of the renowned gay activist Harvey Milk for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. The 1980s had reserved the greatest tragedy for the LGBTI movement since the dark days of Nazi rule. In 1981, a rare new kind of pneumonia was reported in the United States. Originally named gay-related immune deficiency disorder, the disease was renamed as acquired immune deficiency syndrome, or AIDS, after it was diagnosed in people outside the LGBTI community. AIDS is caused by the HIV virus. It was classified as a world pandemic by the World Health Organization by the end of the 1980s. In 1992, the World Health Organization stopped considering homosexuality as a disease. From 1993 onward, the controversial "don't ask, don't tell" policy was applied in the United States military after decades of legalized overt discrimination against sexual minorities. Also, the international community banned as a crime against humanity the persecution of people on account of their gender and other unacceptable grounds under international law in the Rome Statute of 1998. In the 21st century, gay marriage was legalized in 2001 in the Netherlands, with some other 20 countries following suit. Legal recognition of same-sex couples will be studied in the special class. On the downside, violence and discrimination against LGBTI people are still pervasive around the world in the 21st century, as evidenced by the 2016 Orlando killings in the United States. This issue will also be studied in an upcoming lesson. Finally, following traumatic cases of violence, some countries have passed special laws banning discrimination on the ground of sexual orientation, such as the Matthew Shepard Act of 2009 in the United States, of the Zamudio Act of 2012 in Chile that will be analyzed in a special lesson. At the vanguard of the sexual minorities movement today, we find the so-called queer theory, frequently used as an umbrella term to refer to the LGBTI community as a whole. The queer vanguard considers itself as a sexually transgressive movement. This entails a subversion of traditional patriarchal categories of gender and sexual orientation. As for queer theory, reality shows that there are much more than just two genders, male and female, and three sexual orientations, heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual. For queer studies, the concept of sexuality comprises more than gender and sexual relations, including also affection, kinship, and the reinvention of the family, reproduction, property relations, and the public-private divide. Queer activists even criticize their gay and lesbian predecessors for having settled for the movement's piecemeal inclusion into traditional patriarchal institutions such as marriage. Thank you for your attention. Please visit mookchile.com and watch our next class.